Welcome. Today we're going to talk about cameras in Maya. For this I prepared a simple scene with a background and a Buddha statue. And now we're going to render it. So for this we can go to Arnold, open render view, and then just render it. And what you're probably going to see is a black image. And that's because you always need light to see something. And so let's add some lighting, some basic lighting, by going to Arnold Lights Sky Dome Light. And that gives us like a ball of light that comes from all directions. And now we can see something. This should not be your final lighting. You're going to add lights later. Just for now, for the camera, just that we can experiment it, we're going to use this very simple light setup. Now, this is not really the best way to render something, because right now we're using just our working camera, so the perspective camera. And as soon as I change something, the render changes. And so it just can't work anymore correctly. So it's much more useful to create a dedicated render cam. For this, we go to Create, Cameras, Camera, and now we have here a new camera, and we also rename it to Render Cam. And now we can go over here and select the render cam shape. And as soon as we move this around, we can immediately see the updates from this camera. Now, while you can move the camera around here in the perspective view, it's pretty hard to position it and figure out, hey, what is this camera actually going to see and what is actually going to be in the frame. So what you can do is you can go to Panels, Perspective, and then you can select the render cam. And now, instead of modifying the render cam, the perspective camera, we are now modifying the render cam. The other thing that you should always activate for the render cam is the resolution gate. And that's because in the Maya viewport, you may see more than that what is actually being rendered. Yeah, so here this top part is actually not being rendered in our example. For this, you activate the resolution gate, and that's over here. And now you get it grayed out what the camera actually cannot see. Now we can frame this much better. The next thing that you need to do, or which the director of photography is going to tell you to do, is to use the correct lens for this scene. So by default, you have a 35mm lens, which is quite good for modeling because everything's quite standard and nothing is distorted. But you may want to have a distortion, yeah? So you may want to have a fisheye lens that would be like in the 5 to 12mm range. So let's just try that out. Let's put here 8. And let's reposition it. Yeah, so this is like this distorted view for nightmares and those kind of things. And music videos, I guess. But that's where you would use like a fisheye lens. It also could be that you want to make a portrait. A portrait is usually in the 50mm range to 85mm range. So let's reposition that. Yeah. Nice portrait of a Buddha. Of course, you have something like a tele lens, which would be like in the 120 millimeter range. So it's always dependent on what lens you want to use and for what purpose. You can Google this and look into photography tutorials of what type of lenses you would use on a DSLR, and this would absolutely one-to-one be applied to Maya. You really should think about it while before rendering which type of lens you want to use. I mean, don't stick with the default 35 millimeter lens that's just simply there because it's good for modeling. Really think about it, what effect you want to have, and how much of your environment you want to show. So with the wide angle lens, you see much more environment, and here with our telephoto lens, you just see a small part of the environment. So let's take here just a quick snapshot, and so I show you this. So it is now a tele lens with 120 millimeters, and if I now add in the, I don't know, the 30 millimeter lens, and reposition this, that's kind of the same. Yeah, then you're going to see, I mean, for the same position of the camera, you have a totally different field of view. So that's why I'm repositioning the camera. And even if we have something similar, so that so the Buddha is now kind of similar size, you will notice on the different focal lengths that you can see here more of the environment, and that the lines are distorted a little differently. So that's really to keep in mind when you're creating a camera, you have to make decisions of what type of lens you're going to be using. If you are working with a live plate, so if you want to insert this into a real film, Maya even goes on where you can then set up the same lens as the camera the footage was shot on, as well as which film bag it is being used on. Yeah, so how it's being projected to onto the film sensor. Usually you do not have to set this up. For our purposes, it's good enough that you take the time to think about the focal length and select a lens appropriate to the scene that you want to create. Okay. The other thing that you should take into consideration, I mean, the default is a HD aspect ratio, so a 16:9. You may want to have a different aspect ratio. Yeah, so one of the more popular examples would be like an Instagram image. For Instagram, the image needs to be a 1:1 aspect ratio. For this, you open the render settings, and then you go down to image size, and then you can, well, either select from the, either select from the presets a resolution, or you can just manually insert values. Yeah, and now we would have like the 1:1 aspect ratio for Instagram. And you also see that here also immediately this is updated, that it has a direct correction to the Arnold render view. Okay, that's about it, what you need to know about cameras, and see you next time.